I worked for the County Historical Society in their allegedly not haunted house for years. My friend was the educational director, and I was lovingly voluntold to participate in any and all of the events that we put on throughout the year. One of the highlights was called Haunted Hazelwood, and each room of the house was set up in a different theme. An Edgar Allan Poe reading in the formal parlor, phrenology demonstrations in the family parlor, tarot readings in the summer kitchen, and a seance in the dining room. You know, your typical haunted house sort of stuff. The day I graduated from tarot readings to the seance room was spectacular. I went out and bought this huge panel of black lace to drape over my head so my identity was hidden from the guests. I made sure I had enough tricks hidden, quite literally up my sleeve for the event. I attached fishing line to the bottom of a flameless candle and wrapped the end around my pinky, so when the spirits were asked to move something in the room, the candle would move an inch or so until someone at the table noticed. I had a remote for battery-operated candles up my sleeve and would press the on and off button to flicker them on the mantle. La pièce de résistance, my spirit knocker underneath the table, where my socketed feet had one end of a hinged mancala board propped open, and the spirit would knock when asked questions, aka my little tootsies would be kicking like mad under the table to get purchase on a corner of the board to try to knock again. It was genius. My illusions were so effective that after the candle moved with one group, a gentleman jumped up from his chair, loudly announced, "Oh, hell no," and walked out of the house. It also didn't help that during one of my explanations of how I did my tricks, more knocks were heard around in the room, and I had all of these eyes narrowing down at me with suspicion, and I had to tell them that it wasn't me, but possibly one of the actual legitimate spirits of the house decided to make their presence known. That went over like a fart in church. Hey there, I'm Megan, a freelance paranormal researcher and investigator of over 20 years, and welcome to Paranormal Potpourri, the show where we mix the ordinary with the extraordinary to uncover the strange, the mysterious, and the downright weird. The scent profile for today is gasoline, bear fur, and cypress. Let's take a deep breath and get into it. One of the first topics they usually cover are all the different types of psychic abilities. Some have fancy printouts with illustrations and catchy wording. Others will have detailed PowerPoint slides that you frantically try to copy word for word into the notepad that you were provided. I have experienced both to varying degrees of interest and success. You will find an endless world of possibilities in front of you should you dare to Google different types of psychic abilities. And the blogs that managed to escape GeoCities shutting down back in 2009 will flash their JavaScript Sparkle Miss Cleo gifs in your face, all while asking you, what do you think you specialize in, my majestic queen of the stars and cosmos? I was always under the impression that psychic ability was literally the sixth sense, minus a puking Misha Barton in a play tent. It was something that everyone just possessed, and some tapped into it easier than others. Sort of like how people are able to do things that others can't. Hear better, talk louder, see farther, taste those bitter-ass test strips for the super taster genes in Anat and Phys classes. Once you step foot on the spiritual path, you realize how wholly unprepared you are for the amount of information that you've just missed out on, and the misinformation that is spread around like the plague. To break things down for you, there are 10 basic forms of psychic abilities. Calm down. I know that it sounds like a lot, and quite frankly, it is. The experts in the field will tell you that you have just one major ability and just a few minor ones. But don't expect magic to happen and get everything like a warlock making a pact with an elder god in your D&D campaign. We both know that you're going to pick Cthulhu. Don't kid yourself. Benugli, McWalnuff, Cthulhu Ryla, Waganal, Patagan to you too. That's where failing to properly inform everyone occurs. There's really strange gatekeeping practices in the spiritual field, and it completely baffles me that we aren't shouting these findings from the rooftops and just allowing people to tap into what we all inherently possess. The more and more you look into these things, you find out that you can have a mixture of all psychic abilities and specialize or focus on one or two that resonate with you. Think of it like a grab bag of prizes. You just don't know what you're going to get. Okay, so back to business. 10 psychic abilities. Let's get into them. For those wondering, the clair part of these abilities just means clear feeling or sensing in French. It's sort of like adding a cherry or two to your cocktail. It's just a nice little verbal, linguistic garnish. Up first is clairvoyant. This just means that you have the ability to physically see objects or auras, and this is the most common one to find amongst those who have been spiritually flicked in their third eye. I have described this as seeing a movie play in your mind or like a holographic overlay of a person or a place, and while the physical thing maybe still, the holographic image is moving or interacting around in the space. A good example would be like R2-D2's projection of Princess Leia's message to Obi-Wan Kenobi in Episode 4, A New Hope. Also, this is the one that's most commonly tossed in with being able to see ghosts and spirits. Not as common, but still brought up within this category, is seeing things that are happening in the present or have already happened within a location or to a person. Being clairsentient means that you have an innate gut feeling that others just don't trust or seem to possess. You use all of your senses to determine what's going on around you with a person or with a place. And with the spooky types, it just means that you can sense or feel them rather than visually see them. Being clairaudient, you are able to hear spirits talk or move about a space. Some clairaudients can hear words, music, or sounds coming from source. And source is with a capital S. To quote Robert Frost, 2 roads diverged in a yellow wood, and I took the one that told me what the fuck source is all about. When psychics and others talk about source, it's sort of like the internet for quote-unquote gifted individuals. You are able to connect to source just sort of like how you can connect to your friend's apartment Wi-Fi after the first time you hook up to it. I imagine my source, or how I describe it to others, as a big giant cloud about 4 feet above my head, and you can get what you need real quick, pop in, and then you can bounce the hell out. A fancy way of saying clear knowing is being claircognizant. You just happen to know things, and you rely heavily on your intuition without being told or having any prior knowledge of the subject. It's those "how did I know that" moment that some of us have. This is another ability that we all seem to have to various degrees. These next two are where we tend to veer off the clair path, and we're just going to start blazing our own trails in the wild woods. If you are lucky enough to be touched with the ability of retrocognition, this means you can see past lives or events that happened before you were born. And with being precognitive, you just get that feeling that you've definitely done this before as the event is happening. This is commonly associated with the concept of déjà vu, which is that feeling you've definitely done this before as the event is happening. Some precogs can get messages and images while they're dreaming, and then later remember it when they get that feeling that they've definitely done this before as the event is happening. If you've ever gotten weird vibes after touching someone or bumping into something, you may have the gift of psychometry, or feeling the energy released from a particular person or object. Some psychic mediums who work on missing person cases claim to have this skill and will offer their services to the police, manipulating personal objects or effects of the missing And the psychic mediums will tap into source to see if they can track down energetic imprints or energetic manifestations of where this missing person may be or have left traces behind. Do y'all remember that movie George Clooney did a few years back called The Men Who Stare at Goats? Yeah, they were trying to do something called remote viewing. With this, you are able to see things happening in real time from miles away, even countries and continents away. You may get to practice remote viewing if you take mediumship classes or workshops. And one of the pieces of advice you may get is to practice remote viewing in your own home in a space that you're familiar with. And one of my instructors told me to mess around with the people in the space, like give your family members wet willies or flick the controller off the counter or move a pillow on the couch and just see if they make any, comment or notice anything when you get back from class. These last two topics are usually the ones that people associate the most with having quote unquote psychic abilities. Mediumship is the ability to connect with the energy of those who are recently departed or have been deceased for quite some time. Some mediums don't like to be referred to as psychics and vice versa. I enjoy the term psychic medium because it negates exactly what I just said. Channeling is the one skill I find the most fascinating because sometimes it's just fucking spot on. To channel, one opens themselves up to allow a spirit or spirit being to communicate through them rather than speaking to them from source or speaking through a piece of equipment like a spirit box or one of those really hokey spirit box apps you can get from the App Store. Some channelers may adopt the same speech patterns, accents, gestures as the one who is currently using their body as a meat puppet. There have been claims of channelers speaking in different languages that they didn't originally speak or using phrases so far out of their own personal lexicon that it just can't be a coincidence. There's a secret category called physical mediumship. Psych! You thought we were done covering the different types, didn't you? Au contraire, mon frere. The medium who has this skill is usually leading a seance. They have the gift of helping spirits physically manifest somehow into different forms. The physicality can come in a variety of different ways. You've got your normal ectoplasm, and you've got objects moving and levitating, and the ever-present appearance of sounds like tapping, knocking, and rapping. A very good modern-day example of physical manifestation is using a Ouija board. You, with your hands on the planchette, are just a conduit of energy for the spirits or spirits to use to manipulate the planchette across the board to give you different types of responses. So how does that make you feel, you little meat puppet? All right, hold up. Isn't ectoplasm that stuff Slimer's made from in Ghostbusters, you ask? Probably with a fair bit of disgust and trepidation, both in your voice and on your face. Yeah, you'd be correct. But in this case, the neon green sludge that inhales hot dogs like Joey Chestnut on the 4th of July is actually an opaque energetic material that spirits use to manifest themselves and or interact with the physical world. And just for the shits and giggles of it all, we are going to pretend that we all have impressive physical mediumship and channeling abilities for the rest of this episode. Well, at least the people I'm going to talk about believe that they have those gifts. The earliest documented physical medium is a gentleman by the name of Daniel Douglas Hume. Allegedly, As an infant, DDH's cradle had been seen rocking by itself with him in it. Hume's biological mother was well known in Scotland as a seer or a holder of second sight. He immigrated to Connecticut from Scotland and held his first seance in 1851 at the ripe old age of 18. During this seance, it was reported that the table had moved without anyone touching it and would continue to move, even with attempts being made to stop it. At a later seance, 5, quote, heavy-set men sat on top of a table, and those in attendance watched in shocked amazement as the table still moved. The combined weight of the men on the table, 850 pounds. To Google, hi-ho silver, away! Other things that weigh 850 pounds to help contextualize these things. 2 tractor tires, 1 Sea-Doo Fish Pro jet ski, a singular male moose, a camel, and I have just found the greatest news line ever. Massive pot brownie weighs 850 pounds. A Massachusetts cannabis company believes that this may be the largest THC-infused brownie ever made. This is circa 2021, baby. We were a proper goddamn country back then. The guests that were in attendance at the seance stated that the room was well lit and inspections were allowed, and we know that we were not imposed upon nor deceived. Hume got roasted in letters written about him from spectators of his incredible skills. Homeboy didn't deserve a single poor description written about him, and yet I think it's high fucking time that we get back to this style of writing. Tall and thin, with blue eyes and auburn hair, fastidiously dressed but seriously ill with consumption. In a letter from Queen Sophia of the Netherlands, I saw him 4 times. I felt a hand tipping my finger. I saw a heavy golden bell moving alone from one person to another. I saw my own handkerchief move alone and return to me with a knot. He himself is a pale, sickly, rather handsome young man, but without a look or anything that would either fascinate or frighten you. It is wonderful. I am so glad to have seen it. The dude was diagnosed in 1854 with tuberculosis, but nothing you'd sidle up to at your local bar and try to take home for the night. Just a horrifically sick, weird-looking Scotsman that can levitate. Nothing to write home about, I guess. Oh, yeah. I may have forgotten to mention that DDH could float. August 1852, sitters at one of his seances reported to see him levitate twice, causing him to rise up and bump his head against the ceiling. All the while, otherworldly sounds of a ship at sea in a storm filled the room. At another gathering, Frank Podmore, a paranormal historian, would document that we all saw him rise from the ground slowly to a height of about 6 inches, remain there for about 10 seconds, then slowly descend. What is this? A living room for ants? You mean our lunger of a Scot must have guzzled a can of Wonka's fizzy lifting drink before the 1852 seance, or people back in olden times had a hell of a time figuring out inches versus feet. Goddamn fucking metric system. You know the old phrase, where there's smoke, there's fire? I'm going to start using that when it comes to outrageous paranormal claims, because you'll always find Sir Arthur Conan Doyle putting his full weight behind them, and seemingly beside him is Harry Houdini, damn near maroon with rage. ACD went on record, as was his usual approach to these things, and said that there were many documented cases of Hume levitating. One came from a friend of Hume's, Lord Adair, who witnessed him levitate out of a 3rd-story window in one room and come back through the window of an adjoining room. A researcher decades later would visit the building Hume supposedly Mary Poppins himself out of, and suggested that it wasn't the magical and mystical powers of self-flight that brought him back in through the windows, but perhaps the 4-foot gap between the two balconies he simply swung from, a la Crazy Tarzan style. It's all bullshit, my dear Watson. Harry Houdini said that Hume was the forerunner of the mediums whose forte is fleecing by presuming on the credulity of the public. I mean, if you can make a decent living flinging yourself from one window to the next and jiggling tables full of grown men, do whatever makes your consumption-affected heart happy, my good dude. Speaking of which, as the years went on, Hume retired from his full-time gig of floating in living rooms due to his advanced case of tuberculosis. He claimed that his powers were fading and eventually died from complications in 1886 at the age of 53. There has to be something in the air in Scotland because Daniel David Hume wasn't the only kilt-loving, haggis-snarfing Scot to be studied for their physical mediumship abilities. Helen Duncan claimed to develop from a clairvoyant to a physical medium sometime around the year 1926. She traveled around offering seances where she claimed to be able to permit spirits of the recently deceased to materialize by emitting ectoplasm from her mouth. I humbly beg your finest of pardons. There is a scene from the 2009 film A Haunting in Connecticut that comes to mind, though. A family moves into their new home, which used to be a functioning funeral home / mortuary, and the kids find a box of photos from a seance that seemingly occurred in one of the rooms of their house. As the scene plays out, a character by the name of Jonah, who was at the seance, has a large mass of ectoplasm ejected from his mouth. It's an undulating, smoky clump of material that seems to fill up the entire space. I honestly can never remember the name of this movie, so most of my Google searches are what's the name of the one scary movie with the stuff coming out of the kid, and 9 times out of 10 I do find what I'm looking for. Also, the Warrens investigated this house and the real occupants, so chalk it up on the big board, folks. We are 3 for 3 with mentioning the Warrens. Would it shock any of you to find out that yet again A Haunting in Connecticut was declared a hoax? No? Oh my God. Have we learned our lesson about trusting anything the Warrens put their hands on? Good. All right. Here is a Scooby snack for you for being so clever and just so fucking smart. And just like our good friend Jonah, Helen Duncan had her ectoplasm photographed and documented during her seances. In 1928, photographer Harry Metcalf attended a series of seances held at the Duncan home and documented through flash photography alleged materializations of spirits, including her spirit guide, Peggy. I think it's now the best time to mention that Helen Duncan is also well known for being the last person in Scotland to be imprisoned under the Witchcraft Act of 1735 for fraudulent claims of paranormal activity. You know, the same one Claire Fraser was accused of in the Outlander series. But Claire got her Sassenach ass tossed into the witch pit, but we all don't have a Jamie Fraser to come out and haul us out, now do we? No, we don't. And none of us are bitter about that either, and we are definitely not out here touching rocks and trying to get transported back in time. So what the fuck are we even trying to do around here? Any hoozleby. Metcalf's photos of Duncan's spirit guide ended up being just a papier-mâché doll that was draped in an old sheet. I, unfortunately, looked up a photo of Helen Duncan's spirit guide Peggy, and this shit is straight up Lady Elaine Fairchild from the land of make-believe. Mr. Rogers was out there knowingly giving children their new sleep paralysis demon every time he visited her. In 1931, researcher Harry Price paid Duncan £50 to conduct some tests. One of those tests was a series of x-rays to find out where exactly the ectoplasm originated from. While in a trance-like state, Duncan was able to produce a gauzy white substance from her body. At first, when asked to submit to testing, Duncan reacted violently and ran out into the street hysterically and had to be restrained by her husband. Once settled, Price was able to get decent shots of her abdomen, chest, and thorax. Shocker, no anomalies or abnormalities were detected. Upon closer inspection of Metcalf's photos, Price noted that the ectoplasm looked suspiciously like cheesecloth. He was able to enlarge the photos taken to document the actual warp, weft, and selvage of actual fabric. Price concluded that Duncan was swallowing cheesecloth and then regurgitating it when the time was right. Price said that with the x-rays, Duncan may have had time to remove the cheesecloth before having them done. I personally like to imagine Duncan quickly removing cheesecloth from her gizzard looked a lot like when the magician that works at Applebee's Family Nights pulls those tied together handkerchiefs out of his sleeve for like 9 minutes straight. When Helen Duncan passed on from this mortal realm after conducting a seance, many spiritualists believe that she died as a result of the sudden impact of ectoplasm snapping back into her body at full speed after the light was turned on after the police raided her home. Medical records showed that ricocheting ectoplasm had no impact on her eventual death. She had quite the history of poor health and an obscenely awful heart problem. I wish I could say Yartzen Up fabric would be mentioned only once during this episode, but apparently that was the modus operandi of most physical mediums back in the day. One such medium, Mina Marjorie Crandon, took that concept and hauled ass toward the end zone with it. Marjorie Crandon was an American medium who claimed she could channel the spirit of her dead brother, Walter Stinson. Marjorie began experimenting with seances as a hobby to distract her surgeon husband's morbidly curious obsession with death. Remember from last episode when I mentioned that Scientific American held a contest to prove paranormal abilities with the chance to win $2,500? Yeah, Marjorie was one of those contestants. And in true William Hung she-bangs, pants on the ground guy fashion, she appealed to the hearts of the larger public by not being motivated financially for the monetary gain. And that was fine because she definitely did not win. She did, however, find herself caught squarely between the crosshairs of Harry Houdini's fraud bullshit detector 9000. Houdini and other committee members attended 2 nights of seances held on July 23rd and 24th of 1924. Houdini stated that she breached the control zone by stretching her foot out to ring a bell in the room. It was speculated that it was either within her little Tootsie's reach or attached by a string to some part of her body. Crandon was asked to wear a device to prevent her from using her legs at future seances, and she obliged. I would love to spend 5 minutes in Houdini's brain because the so-called device he created to contain Crandon, yeah, it was just a huge fucking box that she could stick her head and hands out of, and her legs were strapped down inside. Just imagine those portable saunas that you see advertised on those weird pop-up websites, but wooden. August 25th, 1924, Marjorie was placed inside the control box and another seance was conducted. A bell that was placed in the room made a noise. Once the lights were turned back on and Crandon's contraption inspected, it was found that the lid had been forced open on one side. Houdini declared her a cheater and that she had rung the bell herself. Houdini's efforts to discredit Crandon became part of his stage act. He would reproduce the illusions, and because Houdini took a big gulp of that tasty, tasty haterade, published a pamphlet that would be distributed to everyone in attendance at his performances that outlined how Crandon did every single one of her effects. I am but a humble student at the feet of a master of pettiness. I do have a distinct feeling, though, that Harry Houdini and Kendrick Lamar would be really good friends. Along with the mysterious out of the box bell ringing, Crandon was famous for producing hands made out of ectoplasm that came out of her lap. Photos were taken during Crandon sessions, and a teleplasmic hand materialized in them. The hand was examined thoroughly and discovered to be a carved chunk of unidentified animal liver. Investigators were perplexed, though, as to where these objects were coming from, but there was one theory. Marjorie Crandon was a fan of performing her seances in the nude. So much so, there was speculation that some physical modifications were done to her. I'm going to let Alan Jackson take over from here for a sec. Well, way down yonder on the Chattahoochee, her surgeon husband sewed a pocket in her hoochie coochie. Jesus. I wrote that, and I can't even take myself seriously. In 1927, a group of Harvard scholars and investigators watched her draw 3 objects from her lap stomach coochie koozie and place them on the table. 2 of the objects appeared to be different-sized hands, and the third one couldn't be correctly identified. Crandon's husband attended all of her seances, and the hands would only appear and move around when he happened to hold her right hand, leading some to ponder that he was aiding her in some sort of slick sleight-of-hand trick to remove the object from its hiding spot and produce it on the table. A few years before her death in 1953, Walter Franklin Pierce described Marjorie as the most ingenious, persistent, and fantastic complex of fraud in the history of psychic research. Spiritualists called her a martyr for the cause, as she was subjected to so many tests for the sake of demonstrating paranormal phenomena. The father of modern-day parapsychology, Dr. Joseph B. Rhine, had this to say about her. I think the main value of the Marjorie case was in the great stir it made in bringing together people from different parts of the world who saw the possible significance of such claims if verified. Marjorie Crandon is one of the most well-researched and well-documented physical mediums of the modern age. I'd say she paved the way for more mediums to showcase their skills with just the clothes on her back, but well, you gotta work in what you're most comfortable in, folks. Ectoplasm and levitating seemed almost cliche in the mediumship world as the 20th century marched along. I mean, if David Blaine and Chris Angel can do it, then it's a high time to try something new and different to catch people's attention. In the paranormal field, you'll hear the term EVP or electronic voice phenomena frequently. These are the whispers, mumbles, groans, shouts, growls, and curses you see with subtitles flashing on the screen when you watch paranormal shows. These are spirit voices recorded on devices with microphones, which could be your own phone, a digital recorder, camera, sound equipment that you don't hear at the time it occurs. It's during evidence review when EVPs are caught. Disembodied voices, though, are what can be heard with the naked ear and are often, in my own experience, not caught on recording devices. Independent voice phenomena is a completely different entity. Some physical mediums employ the use of a metal megaphone known as a spirit trumpet during seances, and voices of the deceased could be heard whispering or speaking through it. But isn't the medium just channeling, letting a spirit overtake them and make use of their voice box for communication? Well, with IVP, the voice doesn't come out of the vocal cords of the medium. Rather, ectoplasmic vocal cords are constructed, and the spirit manipulates them to create sound through the spirit trumpet. Or you could come join me over in the This Person is an Excellent Ventriloquist camp. We've got cookies, treats, blankets, a variety of warm beverages to sip on while enjoying the show. Marjorie Crandon dabbled in IVP and would prove voices didn't come from her by taking a large mouthful of water before the lights were turned off. Voila! Simple as that. No one can disprove that now, can they? And before you ask, yes, she would swallow it down, do the voices, and refill from a hidden corked test tube before the lights turn back on. And I hope to God it wasn't stored in her secret pocket. Etta Reet and Leslie Flint were two well-known physical mediums who practiced IVP in their seances. Reet was described as, shocking, incredibly skilled ventriloquist, and Flint was a stage performer. Having that knowledge shouldn't sway your opinion of credibility towards them one bit. No siree, no how. Etta Reet's IVPs had multiple voices speaking at the same time, some singing even, and some spoke about matters unknown to her but known to some in the audience. She allegedly only spoke English, yet voices that came through the spirit trumpet were known to speak in Dutch, French, Spanish, Norwegian, and even Arabic. Voices would call out to those in the audience from the spirit trumpet, and they would have short conversations before the next voice came through. Leslie Flint's seance participants claimed to hear voices of the dead surrounding them in the room. Flint insisted he perform in the complete darkness or from within, that's right, a locked cabinet. The spirit voices Flint brought forth weren't loved ones of the audience members. No. Flint sought a more sophisticated clientele. Archimedes, Winston Churchill, Chopin, Mahatma Gandhi, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, Marilyn Monroe, George Bernard Shaw, Rudolph Valentino, and Oscar Wilde, just to name a few. Etta Reet's time in the spotlight ended soon after she was declared a fraud by physicist Christian Birkeland after he examined her spirit trumpet and discovered the noises coming from it were produced by small chemical explosions of potassium and water reacting. Leslie Flint must have read Helen Duncan's spiritualist obituary because he adamantly opposed any light source during his seances, as he feared it would send the ectoplasm hurtling back into his body like a kick in the midriff, so everything was done in the pitch black. Melvin Harris, a paranormal researcher, attended one of Flint's celebrity-filled sessions and had just a couple of critiques. I have to conclude that his spirits were awfully mixed up. His Valentino speaks with a stage French accent, while his George Bernard Shaw sounds like an irascible English colonel with no trace of his precise and memorable soft Irish brogue. Repeat after me, kiddos. If you can't get it right the first time, don't try it a second time. And if they are well known, maybe try a different impression instead. For me personally, this is a weirdly touchy subject. I've faked my way through a few evenings of seances and still find myself fascinated by the process when others attempt them. I've also been a part of a few legitimate seances and have experienced strange phenomena during and after them. Where the line starts to get a bit blurry is my experience as a medium. Not only am I a paranormal researcher and investigator, I've been flicked in the third eye by fate herself and have a few unique abilities that I've honed over the past few years, one of which is a fairly good mediumship skill. My first real-world mediumship reading happened at a local Mexican restaurant over a basket of chips and salsa and a few margaritas. I was asked by a good friend of mine to do a reading for her friend who wanted to get into contact with her recently departed dad. I literally had just finished my mediumship training workshop the weekend prior, and the idea scared the absolute dog shit out of me. I agreed, though, mainly because if I did a piss poor job, my friend said she was going to pay for my meal, and I am a baller on a budget. I asked her friend to bring some personal objects of her dad, but not to give me any reasoning behind them or their significance. I wanted to suss that context out for myself. She handed over his hat, and the moment I got a hold of it, I realized I had already had an encounter with her dad a few days earlier. We both met each other for the first time in our underwear. I was stumbling out of the bathroom after a late night visit, and half delirious with sleep, I saw an elderly gentleman in his white skivvies and undershirt standing in my hallway. I think I'm pretty sure I nodded at him, told him to please stay out of my room, and I collapsed face down onto my bed, and our meet cute was lost to dreamland. Showing up in your underwear seems to be a common theme between these two friends of mine and their dearly departed dads, because my good friend, her dad really seems to enjoy eating a Snickers bar while dancing around in his tighty whities, making the most obscenely direct eye contact with me. I have asked him multiple times when he does show up to please get dressed, and he says no because he's comfortable, and why would he? And honestly, I can't argue with that. You got to do what you got to do on the other side. So I would just like to say thank you, Ray, for the hours of imagery you have left in my mind about what your underwear and Snickers eating dance looks like. Well, according to said friend, that meet cute with her dad definitely sounded like him, and it was definitely something that would have happened if he was still alive. Not that he'd be in my house in the middle of the night in his underwear, just that he would commonly be walking around. You know what? I'm just going to end it before more things come out. For the rest of the night, thankfully, her fully dressed dad stood behind my right shoulder, about 4 feet behind, and answered a lot of her questions that she had. He told me to tell them that he was happy he brought these two dipshits back together, and that he had to go now. The waiters were staring at us kind of funny. If I had to place my skills into a category, I think I would be a wicked mash of mediumship, psychometry, and whatever comes after the hyphen that starts with Claire. I never know how to truly answer the question when someone asks me what my abilities are or what I'd like to call myself. I just say I'm me with a footnote of really fucking strange. I don't know if I'd make the cut as a physical medium, mainly for the reason that the one time I'd try to squirrel away some cheesecloth in my gullet would definitely be the night I accidentally swallow it down, and then would have to go on to explain to my supervisor at work why I can't come in tomorrow because I had to have emergency fabric removal surgery. Thanks for sticking around this episode. If you like this and want to find out more about the paranormal world, please follow me on Facebook at Already Here Investigates and join the Paranormal Potpourri podcast group for updates and general tomfoolery. I'm Megan, and thanks for joining me in the simmer pot of Paranormal Potpourri. Smell you later. A few announcements before I end this episode officially. I have a website now. You can find me at www.alreadyhereinvestigates.com. It is full of all of my various social media links, a landing page for the podcast, and if you are in need of any paranormal advice or would like me to come and do an investigation, I have links on there on how to contact me about that. If you would like to see me in person, please do it in public. And a good opportunity for you to do that would be on March 8th of this year. I will be in Houghton Lake, Michigan at the Potographs Parafest 6, sponsored by Murray's Legacy. Tim and Lauren, a new chapter. Tim and Lauren Mail are two very good paranormal friends of mine who have been putting on this Parafest shindig for the last couple of years, and I have lived vicariously through their adventures and postings on Facebook, and now I get to go and I get to live out my wildest dreams of hanging out with a bunch of paranormal people. So if you have nothing else to do, or happen to live in the area of Houghton Lake, you can come see me and see my buddies. Again, that is March 8th, 2025. or you can donate to your local animal shelter in the name of Mr. Murray.